Thank you, Ajay, and good morning, everyone. Since this is the first time you folks are discussing India at this forum, I think it's worth telling you a little bit about the overall economy. It was, for centuries, going back to the days of the Roman Empire, the largest, richest economy in the world. In 1700, for example, it accounted for 27% of global GDP, which is slightly higher than the US accounts for in the world today. The revenues of the Indian emperor, the Mughal emperor Aurangzeb in 1700, exceeded those of all the crown heads of Europe put together, including Louis in his palace in Versailles, and the King of England in Buckingham Palace, a whole lot of them. But in the course of 200-odd years of British exploitation, rule, depredations during the colonial empire, they managed to reduce this country into one of the poorest countries in the world by 1947, and really a poster child in many ways for poverty, illiteracy, disease, and so on. It's now gradually coming back to the growth path. It's the third largest economy in the world now in purchasing power parity terms. I'll come back to that in a second. Capable of getting to the top three nominally as well, if it continues growing as it is. And since 1991, it's managed a compounded annual growth rate of 8.4%, which is second only to China. What makes India such a vibrant market and so difficult to ignore, and worthy, therefore, of your consideration here, are its scale, size, demographics. And so I will inflict some more numbers on you, and then I'll try to spare you those. The population now is 1.31 billion. It's growing at 1.3%, which means that it's heading to what demographers expect will be a peak of 1.7 billion people later in this century. The life expectancy is getting close now to the biblical 10. The Brits left it with a life expectancy of 27. It's now closer to 69. The literacy rate, again, the Brits left it at 17%. It's now about 79%. And the GDP at current prices is 2.25 trillion, growing this year at 6.75%. But as I said, in PPP terms, that's about 8.7 trillion, larger than Japan, in other words, to be the third largest economy. It's got plenty of foreign exchange reserves, 368 billion as of March. Fiscally conservative, with a gross debt to GDP ratio of just 69%, which compares to China's gross debt to GDP of 260%. The savings rate in India is currently 31%, the highest in Asia. The investment rate is 34.2%. So the availability of resources for investment is clear. We are, in terms of the overall macroeconomy, where China was in 2004. But if we grow just above 8%, we are estimated to reach a $10 trillion economy, even nominally, in the early 2030s. We have a strong industrial base, the same steel capacity as the US, about 100 million tons, 2.5 times the current capacity, 2.5 times the cement capacity of the US, 350 million tons in India, and 1 billion mobile phones in India versus, 350 million in the US? So you're looking at a country with some interesting numbers. Also a very youthful population. In 2020, Japan's average age will be 48. Western Europe's will be close to 45. Even the US will be pushing 40. And if you cut back on immigration, it might even be higher. China will be at 37, but India will just be 29. People in the productive age group of 15 to 64 will be 2/3 of the population by 2025. And the growing middle class, estimated today at about 300 million, is pushing consumption patterns up, and they will need places to work and to live. In other words, Indian real estate has nowhere to go but up. The number of Indians living in urban areas of the country is likely by 2030 to be over 600 million. That'll be twice the size of the US population. 10 million people are migrating every year from rural areas to India's cities. And the real estate market in India will therefore, it's predicted by reputable sources, as being expected to increase by 7 times its current size of $126 billion. As more and more people move into India's older cities as well as new ones, developing townships and urban areas. Real estate will not only employ large numbers of people, but also help to build the lives to which they aspire. Now, the real estate market, therefore, is looking at a massive young population, real economic development, the obvious need for housing and commercial space, and if you just take one example, the IT sector, for example, you've got office space, which the requirements are about 34 million square feet in India's big cities, with estimated returns in a city like Mumbai at 12 to 19% to developers. It's not just that. The significance of real estate as a crucial factor in the Indian economy cannot be understated, cannot be overstated, I beg your pardon, for the simple reason that in a country that's as large as this, real estate also supplies the second largest source of employment. It's estimated by 2020 that real estate and construction will generate 75 million jobs and will soon become thereafter the biggest employer in the economy, surpassing agriculture, which currently has the #1 slot. A lot of these, of course, are everyday laborers, but real estate and construction work will be their stepping stone to upward mobility. How they'll leave their villages and the relatively unsustainable agriculture, move to urban areas where their children have a better shot at a decent future. Real estate, therefore, is going to be a huge contributor at the macroeconomic level. The housing sector contributes something like 5 to 6% of India's GDP. By 2028, this is expected to double, that's 11 years from now, to 13%. Construction is ranked third amongst the 14 major sectors in the Indian economy, with rapid and consistent growth visible in the last 2 decades in housing, in retail and hospitality. Obviously, demand for commercial space. Entrepreneurship is multiplying dramatically across the country. I think in the number of startups now, we are second in the world to the US. The foreign direct investment inflows are already coming in, and we are, in any case, in Asia, I believe, the 4th largest attractor of foreign direct assistance in the world. Now, foreign direct investment in the world, we don't need much assistance anymore, but we do need investment. The government's also been helpful. The most recent union budget allocated $60 billion for infrastructure development, which of course will open up the way to other kinds of private sector development. There's a smart city scheme which aims to build 100 new generation cities in India. Massive opportunities for Indian as well as foreign real estate players. And then the sheer scale of demand for affordable housing for the poor. The government has an ambitious plan target of 2022 being the date by which everybody in India can have housing, and looking, therefore, at the construction of 30 million homes for the economically weak, which obviously is not something the government can do alone. Maybe not even the Indian private sector alone can do this. It will need partnerships with global players who have the resources, the inclination, and the technical expertise to pull off such massive projects. I'm in Parliament, and we've also been monitoring the situation. The upper house of Parliament has passed a new bill, the Real Estate Regulation and Development Bill, which will ensure that customers' interests are protected, that transparency becomes non-negotiable, that efficiency is enshrined, and accountability, both from the government agencies and from the industry, is maintained. Transparency is now acknowledged as absolutely essential, given the past somewhat murky reputation for corruption in the real estate sector. So this law, plus the Real Estate Investment Trust, the REITs, I know you've had them in the States since the 1960s, but we've just started them 2 years ago, and the arrival of institutional investors is changing the sector significantly. Bureaucracy is also coming down quite a bit. The Mumbai Corporation, for example, or the Technopark in Trivandrum, where Ajay and I come from, have both gone in for a single window clearance mechanism to cut the time required for permissions to get construction projects off the ground. In the state of Kerala, of which Trivandrum is a capital, the process of standardizing and easing the issue of permits to speed up things has gained tremendous speed, and corruption, therefore, is dropping down. Now, we classify our cities into tier 1, 2, 3, and 4. Tier 1 are the big metropolitan cities, over 10 million in population, many of them. The ones you've heard of, Mumbai, Calcutta, Delhi, Bangalore, Chennai, and so on. These cities have moved up last year in the global real estate transparency index to rank 36 in the world out of 190 odd countries. That still means we have some way to go, but structural reforms and the changes in the regulatory framework I alluded to are enabling upward movement. I think people realize now that corruption is always a deterrent to the foreign investor, and they want to stamp it out. The arrival of the goods and services tax regime, a new nationwide tax, the GST, and a new act that outlaws properties being held by people in somebody else's names, the Benami Property Act, means that existing players in India will have to rethink and restructure the way they do business. I'd love to know what Rajiv thinks about all that, since he's in the business. But the old ways clearly can no longer work. Competition from abroad will mean the quality, efficiency, and style of the real estate players will have to evolve, and transparency will be essential for all this. Rapid urbanization, as the Indian story develops, means there's bound to be enormous demand for real estate in the country. And not just the residential, which seems to be the burden of my song so far. We need roads, houses, canals, highways. We need office, retail, and commercial spaces for all these people. Industrial and manufacturing units, and more. To give you two examples, tourism. Tourists will need many more hotel rooms than we have right now. As of 2015, we just had 1,000 hotels with about 64,000 rooms. That's not even a fraction of what we're really going to need as tourism takes off, as it's beginning to. And the second example is healthcare. We actually have a medical tourism market where people are coming. I've even met an American who came to India for a hip replacement operation at 10% the cost that she'd have paid in the US. We are expecting 8 million medical tourists by 2020. And meanwhile, for our own folks, especially our poor people, we still need 2 million hospital beds before we get to the global standards. So these beds obviously will require roofs as well. Now, the residential segment's already large. It's growing. At the moment, it's 80% of the real estate sector, and I don't believe that's going to be indefinitely the case. The vast majority of our population is in the age bracket of 15 to 35. That's about 65% of the population. So you can be sure that demand for housing is not going to plateau at any time in the future. We already face an urban housing shortage of some 19 million at the moment, and a rural shortage of under 15 million. There are, however, practically no players with a pan-Indian presence. Some of our biggest companies are located in specific states or specific cities and have their reach limited geographically. One survey found that out of 11,000 developers in India, only 285 had the complete depth and expertise to have a nationwide capacity. So the opportunity is very much there for foreign players. Take something like malls. 50% of all the malls in India are located in one area, the national capital region around New Delhi. The entire country, this bigger country, has just 213 malls. Trivandrum, which we've mentioned a couple of times, has no malls currently, but 3 major ones are under construction, and one of them is going to be part of Taurus's coming up project. As established multinational players enter India, there will definitely be greater demand, sustained by Indian consumers as well, so the opportunities are great. Now, I mentioned Tier 1 and Tier 2. Trivandrum, I keep mentioning it since I'm the MP from there, is a Tier 2 city. So while you've got the big metropolitan cities like Mumbai and Bangalore, which do attract investment already, the Tier 2 Indian cities are an underexploited opportunity. They have been expanding and growing rapidly, but there are 65 Tier 2 cities in India with about 1.5 million people or more in each one of them. And there simply isn't enough that has been done to jump into these cities. I'm conscious of the time, so I won't give you more examples. I could in conversation, but cities like Trivandrum, Visakhapatnam, Bhubaneswar, there are a number of cities like this which are really transforming in many, many ways their own infrastructure and need significant real estate development. And as I say, these aren't tiny places. You're looking at 1.5 million people in all of these. Trivandrum, by the way, has the highest per capita income of any city in India. which is quite astonishing because it's even higher than Mumbai. In my own constituency, therefore, we have a national highway bypass, a project that had been pending for 40 years till I bust through the log jams. We have a port coming up, which is going to be India's only all-weather deep-sea port and container transshipment site, working with a private partner. We have a technopark that's housing various multinational companies. We have research and educational institutions. And in other words, I mean, I've taken a bit longer than I'd planned, but just to say that you've got this huge, big, large, booming country with tremendous opportunities, not enough real estate players coming in to exploit it. And that's why I believe it's time that the MIT World Real Estate Forum focused on India and checked out the opportunities that really have been there for a while and have been neglected in recent years by most of you.